podcast. Hello. I was going to say,
did
what's up? I was going to say, what's up, but I didn't.
Did you say hell and welcome?
Hell is here. Hell is real. Dude, in Ohio on the highway, on 75, you'd drive past tons of billboards that said hell is real.
Oh. Usually they're in a row. It's like, hell is real.
Yeah, it's like, hell
and it's
is
like,
real.
wait, what was the first
and
one?
then it's like the 10 Commandments. It will have like the 10 Commandments on some of them. Wow. Hell is real, baby. That's my
hello and welcome.
Hello and welcome. Hell is real. Thank you for tuning in. You don't have to be you don't have to be 30 to listen. You don't have to be near 30. Lindsay and I are over 30, but we started this like 6 years ago when we were going through our Saturn return. We were basically making that transition from our 20s to our 30s, and we felt like we couldn't be the only ones that were spiritually seeking, that were just wanting more out of life, wanting to find our purpose. And so we created Almost 30 to satisfy all of that. And now it's a community of amazing people all over the world. We provide courses, programs, workshops, all of that stuff.
I was with some friends that have known me for a long time the other weekend, and the last time I was with them on a regular basis was before I moved to LA, so before our marriage.
Yes, honestly.
For almost 30. And one of them came up to me like one-on-one and was just like, your energy is just so different, like in a good way.
Yes.
It was very sweet. But it got me thinking. I was like, wow, like just thinking back or feeling back to my energy, you know, back in 2012, 13, living in the city and bartending and doing all these jobs and just being a hoot. And just thinking about what I was like inadvertently manifesting back then.
Wow.
By being in that, in those stories, in those patterns, in that energy, or what I felt like I needed to maintain in order to survive, what I was inadvertently manifesting. A bunch of assholes, and just probably things I have to think about it and write it down. But whether it was like health stuff,
there was like no co-creation energy.
no,
Like there takes a consciousness, and we're excited about our interview today to talk about manifestation, the science of, with Dr. Tara Swart. But there is such a, you know, I really think about, I was doing the same where it was, I don't even know if I was manifesting, but there was no co-creation of my conscious choice and decision to participate in what I was getting out of my life and what I was seeing. I think honestly, I, like every basic person, I found the secret. That was the first thing that I found, and actually really, really worked to like a certain extent for my manifestation. And that's when I really started manifestation, because it was almost like I was willing my way to thinking positively. And it was the conscious effort I had to make continuously to choose the better thought. And I think that's what I got out of Law of Attraction, was not like think positive and everything will be good, but it was a reminder for myself to choose the better thought over and over and over again, to be conscious of my thoughts, to write things down that I want, to be intentional. And it's missing quite a bit, and that's what TBM work really, really satisfies, is sort of the holes that the Law of Attraction and The Secret has. But I did find that to be like a really, really helpful springboard, and that was like the first time I really consciously manifested.
Yeah. What was the thing that you manifested with The Secret, or one of them?
At that time, one of the things that I manifested was I had to leave that job I was in. So I was in the corporate world, and my work environment was getting really toxic. I had a sexual harassment case with my boss that was just really traumatizing. And so that was, you know, there was 100 signs before I left. And so that was really the straw that broke the camel's back. But I also wanted to travel, and I had found Justin, so I wanted to find him. So I needed money. So I needed money. I was like, I was living out of my means at that point. I was making $40,000 a year, just not really being smart about my money. And my grandfather, who was very successful in business, for the first time in his life, like gifted us, I think, like $5,000. I don't know how much it was, but a certain amount of money that really was able to float me from leaving that job to the next job, and then support me in going to that trip I went to in Patagonia. So we had never gotten money from him before. I didn't know where I was going to get money from, but I needed money to support me in the transition period because I didn't have any other source of income at that time. And so it was like that sum of money that would be my bridge between jobs and from moving to Chicago to New York.
Yeah. Yeah, with money too, it's interesting, kind of like the judgment and stigma we ourselves put on the source of where it comes.
100. I literally said it, and I'm like, everyone's like, oh, you privileged, blah, blah, blah.
No, but it's like, I think that's part of the block for some people. Because like sometimes money has come in from very interesting sources for me. I was going to make a joke. I don't even
tell me more.
No, but kind of like that where I didn't need to do anything in order to get the money, you know, and it feels like, wait, I didn't earn this. Wait, is that fair?
Yes.
And I've learned to trust and to not judge the way it comes in. Obviously, if it feels misaligned, like that's something different. But if you're just judging it because you're worried about what other people will think, then
100%.
I just think it.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like removing the shame around whatever that is, like however it is the money comes in. And when I was living in Los Angeles, when we finally got to Los Angeles and I had quit my full-time job to pursue blogging and getting myself in quite a bit of debt, and I was serving and nannying and doing all these odds and ends jobs, one of the ways I made money was through this really, really, really weird thing. It was this Japanese company called Bomo, and they wanted to take videos of influencers showing off their like outfits or something. You guys, bizarre. But I made like $500 a video. They reached out to me randomly. I really didn't have to do much work, and I was able to make like enough money for my rent through these videos that I was doing, which are probably in some crazy dungeon in the dark web. But it was like, this is a source that I would have never known about. And then also too, Let's Travel Morocco. When I was doing that, I had a travel company. I would always make the money that I needed through that source or through random sources and opportunities that I had created. But yeah, I think that's a really good point about how we think the money will come in. Because I noticed that with Justin too. Like with him and his businesses, he's like, oh, you know, I can't ask my parents, or I can't ask this company for this or whatever. And it's like, you have to remove all thought about where it can come from and where it cannot.
Yes, because thinking about like the freedom that it provides in order to focus on what you really want to do and or takes the stress off of a certain part of the process that you're in. I just think it's really, and same with me. I feel like I've always had the most random forms of income, especially when I was in New York. Like bartending was my most stable, but then I would travel to Boston for a day, probably every few weeks, to do these, you know, you go onto a website and a person would pop on and be like, hi, welcome.
Yes.
That was me in thousands of videos. And I would just go up there. But how did it was like the most random, but that was something that really kept me afloat.
Yep.
And then fit modeling was random as hell. But like I met someone who did it and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I don't give it as much credit as I'm like thinking back now. But like those were like serious gifts for when that allowed me to audition when I could and
huge.
Take classes for acting.
And I think the important part for me is like taking the stigma off of where I think money can come from and where it can't. You know, it's like, honestly, the money can come from the weirdest places. You could win the lottery. You could win a giveaway on Instagram. You could inherit money. You could get a raise at work. You could start a new business and make money. You could get an offer for, like, there's so many different ways that we can make money. It's like, I've had to come back to that over and over and over again, that I'm going to make money through a certain way. I'm going to make money through this way, and really just try to stay open as much as I can to making money from any way possible. Because I look at all these really, really wealthy people. I'm like, they have made money. What is it? The average millionaire has like 6 or 7 streams of income, maybe even more. And so how can I create, first of all, those streams of income that are setting myself up to be successful anyways, but then also too, never denying the possibility of a miracle in any way. When we were in Cabo, after our wedding, Justin was like talking to the valet to get the car up, and I went to go sit down at this couch, and I found $100 bill on the ground, and I didn't tell him because he'd be like, P, you have to give it back. And I literally found $100, put it in my pocket, and just went on my merry way.
Yeah.
was my $100.
Wow.
I know.
Well, that's good because then you circulate it too.
100%.
We're going to get hate mail.
I know, honestly. They're like, where's my... You guys, it was in a random spot in like the middle of a corner in a dirt pile. And I felt like I deserved
spit
it.
on it.
I know, honestly.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I'm curious what your experience with that is, or your view on like different
And the
forms
shame or the resentment that you have when other people... It's huge.
Well, that's something that Lacey talks about in TBM,
Yes.
where it's like looking at where you are jealous or triggered and seeing where that is showing you that it's time to up-level and expand and that it's possible.
Yes.
Rather than, oh, that'll never happen for me. It's like, no, you are feeling that way because you have yet to, up-level to that, I don't even know the term, but to that belief that you can experience that. So it's almost like a frustration.
Yes. We have a friend who's a dear friend that recently launched something that she had saw someone else do months before. And I remember being with her when she saw this other person launch this thing, and she was like, why is she doing that? That is like da-da-da-da. And she kind of had a little bit of, it's like a little jealous moment with it, and was like jealous of this person doing this thing. And then she does a similar thing, not exactly the same thing. 6 or 7 months later, it's like her biggest launch, making the most money. She feels the most fulfilled. And it was that initial annoyance of like, why is she doing that?
Yeah.
Kind of like, who is she? Why didn't I do that? Why didn't I think of that? And then she does it, and it's like her most successful thing. And so it's that rethinking of like what we find annoying or what we find triggering or what we find ourselves being resentful of, because that's like a great opportunity to look at what that is. And is it something that we want to do in the world? Is it something we want to express? Or is it something that, we feel like we should be doing, but we're not?
Yeah, 100%. Are you manifesting anything right now?
My manifest. Oh, my house. I want a fucking house. We had a healer over the other day, Manuela. She's really beautiful, Manuela. And when she pulled up to the office studio, she's like, oh my God, I actually was in your house in my mind.
Oh, wow.
She's like, I actually know what it looks like. And she like drew it. She's like, you walk in, you go here. She's like, your house exists. It's already there. She's like, this is like, you will be out of here soon and your house is like already ready, because that's what I've been working on manifesting forever. But that is a huge thing, because that's not only me expanding into the house, but it's like me expanding into myself as a wife and as a mother, and like being more serious in quotes about my life. Because when, in my perspective, living in an apartment with Justin, we've lived in apartments in, Queens, here, etc. It's like that feels like the young kid still. It feels like this phase of life, and to believe that I can afford to have a home is like, whoa. And I don't know if we'll buy per se, basically within this market, but to feel like I can live in a space that's really big and my own is like very expansive. I'm sure a lot of you listening have, moved into a home, rented, bought, whatever. And I'm sure it was probably one of the most expansive moments.
Yeah, it's like, I guess, what is that belief that you have now that I don't think you're blocked at all, but like, is there a certain story that you have around just that you're not?
I think it's hard because I'm more stable in my career than my partner currently is. And I feel like that's a little bit of a, makes me waver a little bit.
Yeah.
So I feel like if we were both on the same trajectory at this moment, it would be like, oh yeah, done. But I feel like a little bit like I have to kind of hold back.
Yeah.
Because it just feels like a little bit like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people can relate. And I feel like at different seasons of our lives with our significant others, it's like, there might be a point at which like
the dance,
he fucking takes off and you're like, okay, I'm like, things are a little either not slow, but just a little quieter. And yeah.
What about you?
What am I manifesting? I'm manifesting a couple things, actually. I'm manifesting a producer. So someone that I really like, I really connect with and want to collaborate with, and that I can, and that I could also just be like express my own artistic vision with, and not have them like kind of dictate which is not what a producer is. But I think because I'm like so green in this creating music, it's like I wouldn't want to be too impressionable. Like I would want to like direct everything and just kind of really hold true to my vision. So someone who's like jazzed about me, but also is incredibly talented. And I think I need a male energy. And then a car.
Yeah.
I mean, we can go to get a car, but like I'm like, oh, I want to like manifest like just like I've never had like a car that I'm super excited about.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to either, I don't know if it's like, yeah, I don't know whether it's buying a car, renting a car, or leasing a car, or maybe partnership of a car. I don't know. Probably, I don't know. So that, and yeah, I think just, you know, money is one of those things for me that like I always feel provided for, but I do have work to do around, yeah, I feel like I've inherited some worth around money and some anxiety around money, which I feel like the energy of money doesn't necessarily jive with. So, even though I can say and feel abundant and always provided for, there is kind of this like back of mind, which definitely comes from just like my upbringing of like, it's not going to stick around for too long. You know, it's like this very evasive thing. So I'm just working on that. And again, just always like being open to where it could come from. Not like the music might not provide the money form of abundance, but it might be another form, or maybe it will down the line. So being very open to how I'm being provided for while I'm doing all of these creative things, you know?
Yes.
And not like being resistant to it. Because I feel like I'm resistant sometimes to certain forms of being compensated. Like whether it's like a partnership and I'm like, no.
Yeah. Because that feels like you're selling a part of yourself a little bit.
Yeah, I'm like a little resistant to that right now.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah. But it's, you know, it's something that comes pretty naturally to us to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm like, Lens, why aren't you just saying yes? I don't know.
There's seasons though. Actually, I had a thought about that. What was I? I had like a thought. It was like, oh, I was like, dude, sometimes my like guides and my spirit team are just a little fucking aggressive. And I was in the car and I was thinking about that partnerships, and they were like, what would be the highest worth thing to do? Is it you promoting yourself? Or is it you promoting someone else?
I know.
I was like, I've got it. Thank you very much. But then it's like trusting the universe enough. Like, can you make up that gap?
Yes.
Make up that gap.
That's the whole thing.
You know, show me how I can make up the gap of whatever that is. Because I think a lot of times in life we do things that we're like, oh, it's just for the money. It's not like we do it for the money, but there are times in which we're doing things specific for the money. And it's like, what's that energy? Not that my partnerships, I love every brand we work with, but there are times when I'm like, who do I look up to, and are they doing what I'm doing? Whether it's getting up at this time I'm getting up and eating the things I'm eating and spending their day the way I'm spending it, you know, that kind of mentality, not just related to like how I'm making money.
Sure. Yeah. It's very, very interesting. So we're talking to Dr. Tara Swart today, who is now a part of the To Be Magnetic team. But she is just the most impressive.
Oh, she's the best.
She's a neuroscientist, medical doctor, executive advisor. She lectures at MIT. She's the author of the best-selling book, The Source. And she is just so passionate and makes it very, very tangible. And I feel like her work with TBM has just been so profound for, you know, the TBM community, who I'm sure a lot of you are here now. And thank you so much for listening. But adding the science to the more spiritual and tangible has been really impactful for me in order to like hit it home.
Yes. Yeah, she is just incredible. She makes everything very simple, and she takes like very dense, heavy neuroscience information and makes it very pragmatic. And so we come at this conversation just like in the way Lindsay and I generally do, which is very intuitively through the science of manifestation, what's happening in our brain. We talk about envy and jealousy, and we really just let the conversation go where it be. But if you're interested in any of the TBM work or manifestation or really the brain detail behind creating a life that you love, I think this is a perfect conversation. And we loved talking to Dr. Tara Swart. We laughed, we had fun, and I really know that you guys are going to enjoy this one.
Yeah, she's the coolest. You can learn more about Dr. Tara at taraswart.com and then tobemagnetic.com. Highly recommend the Pathway, which is kind of like the all-encompassing membership.
Yeah, and we actually have a Tara from To Be Magnetic speaking in our membership. Yeah, so in our membership, so we have a membership that is really, really powerful. We have workshops, we have extra content, we have downloadables, journal prompts, giveaways,
live hangs.
It's just the best place ever. And we have one of the TBM coaches that's going to be doing a workshop specifically with our members, which is going to be so much fun.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about that. And thank you all for just being, so engaged and so inquisitive along, these 5-6 years that we've been doing this and just inspiring us with this type of content. We always want to go deeper. We always want to be evolving and supporting one another in doing that. So thank you for your support. Thank you for subscribing. And we'll see you on the other side.
See you soon. I'm really excited to have you. I will never forget when you first started working with Lacey in the To Be Magnetic team. I'm on a few different group chats with Lacey. She's one of my dear friends, and she doesn't often come forward with really exciting news and information. She is not one to just talk about what's going on with her in a really exciting and beautiful way. And she was so deeply excited to have you join the team. I mean, she came forward with the information, was like, oh, we have this amazing woman that's going to be joining the team. And I've seen her be that excited, but I've never seen her be that excited in a long time. So I was just so grateful for you to join. And it felt like the grounding force for her. She's known the science sort of in her own way in a long time. And then to have you validate a lot of the manifestation work has just been really beautiful. So long time coming. Lacey's a friend, you're a friend, and we're excited to dig in today. I feel like there's so much as it relates to manifestation and the science behind it. And Lindsay and I are just pumped.
Yeah, truly. And we've been doing Lacey's work for a long time now, and not a day goes by that we don't hear from someone in our community about them doing Lacey's work. So it's actually really, I know a lot of people will just connect with this episode. But I was talking to Krista right before this, and I was like, do you think Dr. Tara knew like years and years and years ago that something like this talk about manifestation would come about? Knowing the science for as long as you have and doing all the research, I'm like, was there ever this connection that you made to it? Because it feels so perfect for us to hear the science and then the spiritual aspect. But were you feeling this years and years ago?
I felt it strongly around the time that I got divorced, so over 10 years ago, when I turned to more spiritual readings, really, to try to find my way out of it in the best possible way. And that's the first time I formally remember discovering manifestation and, practice it. Well, I'd read about it before, but not practiced it, which I think is quite a common story as well. It sounds great, but either you feel like you don't need it or it sort of feels like a big commitment. Now that I'm really into it, I look back and I almost feel like children, they know about it, but it kind of gets squelched out of us. Like people say, oh, don't say such silly things, or don't, come up with these silly ideas. And so I think that I used to see and feel things when I was a really young child that were not explainable. And then because my education was very scientific, that it probably became less and less and less until I needed something more than just science to sort of sort my own life out.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things how in today's day and age that we are seeing how spirituality can live with science. And that's really mysticism. You know, from my perspective, like science and spirit is really this age's mysticism. When you talk about that, you know, people discover manifestation and it's too hard for them, or they just kind of see it as something that they can't do. What's happening neurologically for people where they feel like that seems nice, but, you know, it's not something I could do long term, or it's not something that I could really make work for me?
In my experience, and I'd actually love to hear from you as well on this, because this is more in my experience, but being a scientist, it's probably based on that a strong negative motivator gets us into action. Sometimes a really strong positive one will do that too, but not as strongly as a negative motivator. So I'm thinking, for example, when I had my wedding come up and I wanted to look a certain way and for the whole wedding to feel a certain way, I did a lot of things I wouldn't normally do to try to make sure that happened, but that was unusual. And I remember thinking then, okay, this is a really positive motivator, but most of the time we do things to avoid a perceived loss, or we do things because things have gone wrong for us and we need to try to make it better. And actually that is very explained by science, because one of the strongest gearings of our brain from evolution is called loss avoidance. And the brain is 2 to 2.5 times as primed to avoid loss as it is to get a reward.
And,
wow.
And because I guess from an evolutionary standpoint, why is that? Is there like an example from like early primitive days that explains that?
Yeah. So imagine that we were all cave women together. And I said, Lindsay, I'm hungry. Could you go and, you know, gather some berries for us? And you said, well, no, there's a wolf roaming around outside. So I'm like, okay. And then eventually I'm like, Lindsay, I'm really, really hungry. Like, please, could you go? It would take us to be starving to take the risk of going outside if we know there's a predator. If you knew that there was a predator and the risk of going out to get food that's not essential wasn't really worth it, you'd say no to me. So it's literally, yes, you know, I want a reward, but what's the risk to our lives to go and get that? So it was more about avoiding death from hypothermia, you know, death from a predator. Whereas with starvation, you can actually last quite a long time. So even if you're in an uncomfortable position, if you know that there's a quick death out there, you won't go for it.
Got it.
Yeah, it's interesting too, you know, as we evolve and as there becomes less wolves out there, as there becomes less predators that are going to attack us, how within society there's sort of new threats that constantly keep us in that state of fight or flight, whether it's perceived threats or real threats. Mm-hmm. Do you find that from an evolutionary perspective that is like, what would it take for us to be out of that constant state of fear? You know, would we have to completely disengage from the real world? Would we have to stop watching the news? Like, is it possible to live in a state where we don't feel like there's a constant threat looming at all times?
So you're absolutely right. And I love that you both have jumped onto the evolution sort of story, because it explains so much that really resonates with people, because we can all think, oh yeah, that definitely would have happened to our ancestors. So the threats have changed from physical to psychological or social. Although that threat also existed because we could only really thrive as part of a tribe in the cave. And that was literally for physical warmth as well as affection and, you know, looking after each other's children and sharing responsibilities. Now, there aren't as many, in that way anyway, physical threats to our safety or our life, but the social threat of being rejected, being lonely, being abandoned, that's still very, very strong in our wiring. And then other things, because obviously now we have money, for example, that the idea of losing your job, losing your lifestyle, those have become, you know, sort of potential social threats to your safety as well. And, you know, there's so many more. But I would say that financial and relational have become the biggest threats to our safety. So I think obvious examples of that are staying in a relationship where you're not really happy, but you think, well, it's better than being single again, kind of thing. And because that wiring has been there for so long, and of course in Lacey's work, she talks about wiring that has been there since childhood for us as individuals. And we have, you know, made it very clear that the longer an issue has been there, the harder it is to bring it from subconscious to conscious and then deal with it. This is even beyond that. This is for generations and millennia. So it's a very strong default. And it's really every decision that you make is based on, is the world a safe place? Can I do this and still be healthy and happy? And you mentioned a specific, which is not watching the news. Well, I don't know any neuroscientist that I'm friends with who watches the news. And that's the reason, because we're wired to default to loss aversion. If we continually tell our brain that there's danger out there, there's bad people out there, there's accidents out there, you will not want to take the healthy risks that you could to make your life better because you're too aware of the possible dangers.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about this last year too, and just how, one, the loneliness, isolation, the overconsumption in my view of the news, and just the increase in time that we spend on our devices, online, in the digital space, and just how, from an evolutionary standpoint, how that is like so not thriving with the tribe. No. I'm curious, like what you've observed like throughout the last year, and how we can begin to kind of like, I don't know, like rebuild that part of us. Like, I know it's easy to just like, oh, let's get together with friends, but I still think there is that fear, that like anxiety in social situations or being close to one another. So I would love to talk about that, because I know that's kind of happening in real time for people.
I think a nice way to think about it is that we've developed an appreciation for things that we may have taken for granted before. So I have been, in lockdowns, I've been with one other person, and it has certainly made me think. At first, I was like, well, if I'd been on my own, I would have been fine. But as the months drag on, and as it happens again and again, my heart just is so out there for people who've been through that on their own. That is not a healthy state for us. And so a lot of the work I've done in the last year is to encourage people to bathe rather than shower, because immersing yourself in warm water releases the same bonding hormones that you get from physical affection from a loved one. To massage your own body, to do gratitude practices that involve self-touch. So a lot more, being a lot more proactive about the fact that you maybe have been isolated alone, but also even with one affectionate person or, 2 or 3 affectionate people in your family, it's normal in a day to go out and shake hands or hug or kiss like 8 to 12 people. And so that happens and you don't even really think about it. And they say that you need 8 hugs a day just to sort of stay mentally stable, and 20 hugs a day to grow as a person who feels healthy and happy and they can take some risks. So I think suddenly demanding 20 hugs a day from one person is probably, so.
I do that at my house. I'm like, I heard it's 8 seconds to release oxytocin. You have to hug someone. So maybe the 8 hugs is the same 1 second. So maybe that's the 8 seconds, a separate hug. But I always do that. I'm like, we need to hug for oxytocin purposes during the day.
I think everyone should do that experiment. Is 8 1-second hugs enough, or do you need to do an 8-second hug? I think that would be a great result after this podcast if people went and tried that, because it would work one way or another. And then I also think that, interestingly, we've never really appreciated our sense of smell that much. We're very visual and auditory. And so that's not a bad thing to sort of realize that for people who lost their sense of smell, or just realizing that there's a disease that could make that happen to you, makes us appreciate all of our senses and our brain much more than before. The device thing is tricky, because if you didn't use it, you'd be completely disconnected from friends and work people. So I think, in a way, that technology has been the lifeblood of staying connected as a tribe. So we have to really view it as not a bad thing all the time. It depends how you use it.
With the device thing, so with touch and as a bath, it's oxytocin that's released, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So if oxytocin's being released when you're touching someone, or if someone's alone, they can do a bath, then when you're on your phone, it's dopamine that's released? So I guess what's the difference between, and this is my question, so what's the difference between the releasing of the 2 hormones And this oxytocin makes me feel more connected to someone because they're there physically and I'm having the touch, and then I'm having that response of oxytocin released. But I'm on my phone and I'm not touching or feeling or looking at anyone, but I'm having dopamine released.
So 2 things. One is that with a device that you touch, which a lot of our devices are like that now, there's something called haptic touch, which means you don't get touched back. So like if you touch a human, it's a mutual thing. If you touch a device, it's not. So there is a that was just a small point I thought I'd raise that was interesting. When you give somebody really good eye contact, even through a device, it does have an impact on you. I like using the sort of, the acronym of DOSE hormones, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins, but it's way more complex than that. So it's not like if you get a hug, you get oxytocin, and if you get a like on Instagram, you get dopamine. There's hundreds of hormones and neurotransmitters going around all the time. So we simplify it to help, make sense for people who haven't studied science. So dopamine is what gets released when you get something that you want or you like. Oxytocin is the result of bonding. And that is better actual physical interaction, but it can be paying attention. It can be proper eye contact. Serotonin is the mood hormone. So that fluctuates, but it should be within a normal range. So during the day, if something really good happens, then it will get a bit higher. If something bad happens, you feel sad, then that's normal. That's good for it to fluctuate. Obviously, if it goes too high or too low, then that's not good. And then endorphins, and all of these have, so for example, actually the main reason that dopamine exists is for movement, but we're talking more about mental things than physical things. Dopamine is also massively part of motivation and addiction. So, it's very, very complicated. Endorphins are the kind of feel-good factor that you get if you go for a run. That's probably the best way of imagining how you feel when you experience an endorphin, but it can be from other things as well.
With the serotonin, just quickly on that, why would it be bad if your serotonin goes too high? Is it because we would assume that it would drop?
You put that really nicely, but 2 things. I mean, as a former psychiatrist, I was thinking of bipolar disease, where it actually goes so high that you're manic and you don't have a good idea of what's dangerous anymore because it's so overexposed. And things, if you take recreational drugs that induce a lot of release of serotonin, then you get this huge amount of happiness at the time. And so we know from studies that were done on people who took a lot of ecstasy in the 80s that they were much more likely to become severely depressed 10 to 20 years later. So it's not a finite, it's not an infinite amount of serotonin that we can produce. And then less scientific, a bit more spiritual, there is a pendulum swing. So if you go too far in one direction, there is a feeling that you will have to go in the other direction too. So it's all about fluctuations, and a lot of mindfulness is based around regulating your emotions so they don't go too extreme in either direction.
Can't wait to be depressed in 20 years after my ecstasy days.
I'm curious, with your work with TBM, are you also working with the specific hormones to kind of describe ways in which people can successfully manifest and or reprogram their subconscious? Is there kind of are there ones that you're focusing on? I'm just kind of curious, pulling in the science, because this is fascinating that certain hormones fluctuate, certain ones are ones that sustain. So I just would love to bring it into the manifestation conversation.
So as far as I recall, because I did the writing work sort of last year and started it in the summer, I don't think I separated it in the writing. But on the podcast that I do each month, the Explained podcast, we've definitely talked about some of the different ones. So for example, in love, we've talked more about oxytocin, but also about estrogen and testosterone. We have talked about dopamine in respect to numbing behaviors. So for example, if you have an unrequited love, so let's say you've had a breakup, but you still love the person, but they don't want to be with you, then there's evidence that substances like alcohol and ecstasy. I don't know why we're talking about that.
Dude, you're talking about weddings, you're talking about ecstasy, you're just speaking my language today.
And cocaine, I'll throw that in there. So that
did my cocaine. I say that. Not my thing.
Whichever is your thing, basically, lights up the same pathway. So it can reduce feelings of unrequited love, which makes sense of why when people have had a bereavement or a breakup, they're more likely to turn to things like that maybe they don't do all the time. So yeah, I find the whole thing so fascinating. So we've kind of, when I've known that we have an episode coming up on a particular subject, then I've brought in the hormones or neurotransmitters that are relevant to that topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the unrequited love thing is so interesting, like, because I'm just thinking about all of the women in particular, just in a heterosexual relationship where they're like called crazy, you know? And so there really is a science behind the kind of the addiction to the love or the feeling, which I think is so fascinating. Is there something that people can do when they kind of feel that feeling? Because I can imagine that that's a block in manifestation, especially if you're trying to manifest a relationship where your hormones are kind of influencing you to focus more on that like addiction to, rather than a more healthy relationship that is meant for you.
I think that even just understanding what we've just talked about is an important part of that, because if you feel like, whether it's that you're consuming comfort food or alcohol, or whether it's that you're sending those embarrassing text messages that you wish you hadn't the next day, it's, if you understand that there's a drive from your own hormones to make you do that, you can kind of separate yourself from it a little bit. I talk about that a lot with cravings, which tend to actually be a lot more to do with nutritional deficiencies and a poor quality and diversity of your gut bacteria. And so when I coach people, I say, okay, if you feel like eating, lots of high sugar foods, that's actually your gut, the gut bacteria that have gone bad. They need that sugar to survive. So is a bacteria going to tell you what to eat, or are you going to decide? And I think that level of separation, because when you think it's you, it's quite hard to actually argue with yourself. So you either give in or you don't, and then you have this whole kind of cascade of emotions that come after that. If you can separate yourself from it by one step, like that, is it me or is it the bacteria, or is it me? Is it because I'm craving because I've broken up from a relationship that's driving me to eat more chocolate and drink more wine? It's not dissimilar to saying, I would say to you too, let's say one of you had a recent breakup and you were thinking of doing something that I thought you might regret later. I would say to you, Lindsay, what advice would you give Krista if she was about to do this? And even that one step of separation helps you to see, okay, I completely feel like this is what I want to do right now, but I know I wouldn't let my friend do that.
It's huge.
Powerful.
Yeah, being the witness to everything, to all of your feelings. I've been feeling incredibly anxious lately, and I was like, in the middle of the night, I kept waking up and I kept having these like wild thoughts, and I'm like, oh wow, my body is feeling the cortisol. My cortisol is still very high in my body right now, so my mind is trying to make sense of what my body is feeling, and it's sort of pulling these different scenarios and sort of like playing the tape of what it could potentially be that's making my body so upset. And just even that pulling apart of like, okay, this experience is happening, like what is actually going on? And I think that's beautiful about the microbiome. I think about that a lot. I'm like, wow, my little bacteria love sugar. They are green on sugar. And so you have to sort of replace those with ones that don't love sugar as much, and then you end up not craving it. But I think that's a really powerful one. Numbing was something I wanted to talk about, actually. And it was really interesting. I was listening to one from quite some time ago about where you were talking a little bit about numbing. And I want to just check and see if this is what you guys were saying, you, Lacey, and Jessica. With numbing seemed to be a symptom of old types of manifestation processes, because you were just thinking your way into the experience. You were like, I am rich, I am rich, I am rich. And you were, because it was very conscious, that you got tired of that experience because you were consciously doing something and it took mental energy. So people end up numbing because they're looking for that release from that. Whereas with the new process of manifestation through TBM, it's more of the unconscious working. So you don't feel like it has effort. Can you speak a little bit to that and correct me where I'm wrong?
So I agree with you that mental processes, you're very aware of them and they are draining, and you may wish to numb just to have a pause from that mental process. I actually believe that the subconscious work is much harder than the conscious work. So it can make you feel very tired, it can make you feel very hungry. But for some reason, I think once you're committed to doing that deep work, maybe using Lacey's words, it's that your self-worth is a bit above numbing. So numbing is when it's all on the conscious level and your self-worth is low and you are trying, but you haven't gone deep enough to actually change, those subconscious beliefs about your deserving and your worth. So it's easier to get a quick fix. Like, if I have a glass of wine, then I won't think about this so much. When you're doing the subconscious work, Lacey does say before each DI, for example, to take a nap or have a massage or have a bath or, go for a walk in nature. That's to set yourself up as well as possible for that single, sort of piece of work that you might do. But over time, people who are doing that kind of work are looking after themselves better. They are sleeping more. They are eating better. They are keeping themselves hydrated. So there's a lot further to drop before numbing becomes an option. So I think it is where, as you progress along the journey, that becomes less likely. But I wanted to give you a fun fact about your gut bacteria. If you drink diet drinks that have saccharin instead of sugar, the gut bacteria are so clever at surviving that they mutate and they absorb more sugar from your other food than if you just had a sugary soda. So it's quite complex.
Wow, I've heard that before, because people would say that fake sugars don't still cause weight gain, because they would do testing on people that would consume Diet Coke and regular Coke, and they actually say that sometimes the people that consume the diet aspartame, sucralose, all of those fake sugars often end up gaining more weight, and I wonder if that's why. Wow. Terrifying.
Thankfully,
and I think,
yeah,
just as I was saying that, I was looking at Krista's can and I was like, what's she drinking?
Sparkling water. Dara's coming for me today.
Okay. Sparkling
I'm
water.
sipping my sparkling water, ma'am. Jeez.
Oh, God. I would love to, just for people who are just getting into manifestation work, what parts of the brain are being activated or rewired when we talk about subconscious reprogramming?
So if you sort of imagine the brain in 3D, then there's this outer cortex that's folded that a lot of people have seen pictures of. And that's about as thick as your forehead. And then that actually curls around the limbic system, which is the size of your clenched fist. So it's proportional for each person. So my limbic system is that big.
Wow. Cool.
So basically your spinal cord comes up, becomes your limbic system, and the cortex is curled around that. And so those deeper, more intuitive, more emotional pathways are in your limbic system. And they're the ones that are really built by those early relationships with your caregivers. And we know this because some research was done retrospectively on the Romanian orphans that were in orphanages during Ceausescu's regime, many of whom were adopted into America later. America was particularly kind to these orphans. And the story is, it's really sad, that to make sure that they got adopted successfully, and to make sure that they didn't catch diseases and things, the staff were instructed to feed them, wash them, clothe them, make sure they got enough sleep. But they were told, don't play with them, don't hug them, don't give them eye contact, because then they'll bond to you and they won't get a good adoption for the rest of their life. And 85% of those children grew up with mental health problems, couldn't hold down a relationship or a job. Often if they had children, they couldn't care for them, so they got taken away as well. It's really awful. And so, this was some sort of 30 years later that they were followed up. And by that point, brain scanning was available. So they scanned their brains and saw structural physical deficits in the limbic system. And then they went back to the notes and they went back to any of the surviving staff and asked some more questions. And one of the things that came up was that there was a cleaning lady who said she cleaned between the cots, and the one that was by the door where she left, she knew she wasn't supposed to, but she gave that baby a hug before she left for the day. And they showed that the adults who had been babies that slept in that particular cot over the years that she had worked there were in the 15% who got married, had families, had jobs. So the interaction with your primary caregivers when you're very, very young builds the neural architecture in that part of your brain. And if that's damaged through what Lacey puts so nicely as pain, shame, or guilt, then that's when things start to, you see the world through different filters, like the world isn't a safe place, I shouldn't take that risk, that won't happen for me. And actually I heard something really interesting the other day, which I hadn't really thought of before, which is that it's common talk in our cultures to say, life is hard, you can't have it all, don't ask for too much. And it just made me think, I've heard that, we've all heard that. Nobody would ever really say, actually, life is really easy, or I think I will ask for too much and see what happens. I mean, it'd be completely normal if you said to me, Tara, life is hard, for me to say, yeah, life is hard. Because that's infiltrated our culture. So we believe those statements, not just as individuals, but as a culture.
Yeah, I mean, that's my favorite thing on earth, just kind of picking apart those type of things. One of the things that we also say is not to play, or I want to play devil's advocate. I'm like, I don't want to be devil's advocate. And so figuring out different terminology for things like that. And today I was in my workout class, and I am very conscious to music, of what music is being played. And one of the songs, the hook was, "It ain't safe." So it was saying it's not safe over and over and over again. And then the next one was like about being lonely. It was like, I'm lonely. And the next one was pulling up in the demon on God. And it was just all of these things that I was like, wow, these are being filtered into people's subconscious because they're being played as melodies. And that's, a little bit of I just want to take a quick left turn on that. So with music, can it infiltrate our minds so that it is kind of programming us, or what's sort of happening with music?
Yeah, music's very powerful. I mean, all of our senses are powerful. And if you think about the fact that Lacey's work is primarily auditory, that should already make us think about how powerful auditory work is. Obviously, there's the use of binaural beats and hypnotic suggestion, but music can be hypnotic too. So, I mean, I think it's probably no coincidence that all 17-year-olds love Nirvana. I mean, I'm probably giving my age away, but, it's that teenage angst kind of, negative suicide kind of message. And I'm definitely one of those people that gets completely hooked on one song and listens to it a million times and then never listens to it again. And that hasn't always made sense to me why it's that song. But there's something called an earworm, which is where you get like a song caught in your head and you keep going over the lyrics and you can't get it out of your head. And, consciously that may not be related to something that you're experiencing, but subconsciously it could be. Actually, that reminds me, I wanted to come back to what you were saying about your cortisol levels and your brain trying to make sense of that overnight. Did you know that there was a worldwide phenomenon of vivid dreaming in March 2020, which then occurred again in March 2021?
No. But it's weird because our community's been talking to us about that a lot, and we've been having sleep paralysis.
Yeah.
I had that the other night for the first time ever.
A lot of people are having sleep paralysis, but I kind of think it's cool. I think it's scary at the moment.
Now that I know what it is, I'm like,
but I'm trying to like integrate it to being like, oh, my spirit is just sort of leaving my body to do.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Because actually recently I was asked to comment on an article about lucid dreaming, and I didn't really know that much about it, but because I'd seen that thing on Netflix, Behind Her Eyes.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
That threw me for a loop. But that also, like, I think was kind of cool for the lucid dreaming community.
For that don't know, can you explain what it is?
So it's like a psychodrama on Netflix, but you don't realize that the kind of core theme and goings on is lucid dreaming that's happening, and there's kind of this really kind of wild plot around it, and you don't find out till the end.
Is it scary?
It's just like a psychological thriller. So yeah, it's scary in that way.
Dude,
it's not like
they try and make everything cool scary.
But lucid dreaming in that way was, I didn't realize that. Well, I don't even know because it's a show, but can you switch like they did? I don't want to spoil it for people.
Not like they did. So, like in movies, sometimes things, there's a bit of creative license to demonstrate a concept.
A movie. Movies aren't real, right?
But I'm like, I've seen some wild shit.
We brought the doctor on to tell us, movies aren't real.
I've seen some exorcisms, so I don't know.
I know.
But, like, for example, in A Beautiful Mind, which was with the professor that had schizophrenia, they showed visual hallucinations because that's what you can show in a movie. But in schizophrenia, you don't get visual hallucinations, you get auditory hallucinations. So it was, for me as a former psychiatrist, it was a bit wrong, but it was very impactful. So lucid dreaming is actually when you wake up, you become conscious during a dream, and you can direct what happens in the dream. And then, like, what happened to me the other night was I actually thought I had woken up, and I could feel myself lying in bed paralyzed. And I was trying to, like, move my body and I couldn't. And when I woke up in the morning and told my husband, he said, no, that you were still dreaming. But I was like, no, I wasn't. But that's a lucid dream where you believe that it's real life. So without, doing any spoilers, in the show, it looked more like sleepwalking, but then it also went on to show people kind of, having out of body experiences and things. So, but vivid dreaming is different to that. It's just, lots of dreams that you remember, very visual. And in March 2020, they had a strong anxiety element, which is hardly surprising because of, what was going on in the world. But what I just found fascinating is that hadn't happened globally since the two world wars. Wow. So to me, that's a little bit like what you were talking about earlier, which is how connected we are, how connected we must be. If that was happening to me in the UK, you in California, someone in, Africa, someone in Indonesia, it's just incredible to think that at the same time, even though our lives must be so different on the surface, that we were experiencing these emotions, and this is what our brains did to process it.
Mm-hmm. I think we did a dreaming episode a few years ago, and it was, her name was Colleen, and her theory on dreaming was that it's tapping into the collective consciousness. So from like a human level, we're all here in the 3D, but when we dream, it's sort of bringing us up into the spiritual realm. And that's when we can tap in and get insights and sort of there's always thematic experiences to our dreams where people are sort of moving through things at the same time with our dreams, which is really beautiful. And it's interesting too, there's been studies not a long time ago, but maybe in the last 100 years about, they'll do testing on rats. And as an example, they'll do a test on rats in Germany. They'll shock them if they are in one side of the room. And they'll find that rats in different countries will sort of gravitate to the opposite side of the room where the rats in one country were being shocked. And it's almost like the experience of us be able to have a collective consciousness experience as animals and as humans. And that's just, it's the truth. We're all so connected. And so when we do this when we work with the brain and we work with manifestation, we're sort of doing it for ourselves, but we're also doing it for our children, our ancestors, and for the collective. What's happening with, so from a neuroplasticity level, can you explain that?
Explain the connection between people.
Neuroplasticity and the manifestation.
Okay, so neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to grow and change. And you see that very clearly in children from 0 to 2, where they go from being completely helpless and vulnerable to walking, talking, managing their own bowels and bladders. Pretty incredible. There's a lot of change that goes on during the teenage years as well. It's more pruning away of neural pathways that you don't need anymore and readiness for socialization and reproduction. And then we used to think that that process really slowed down or became quite passive from 25 to 60. Well, we used to think from 18. Now we know it's very active till 25. And what we also know is that if you do things to keep your brain flexible, you can make changes absolutely from 25 to 65 and maybe even beyond that. So I believe that manifestation is neuroplasticity. The process is underlined by neuroplasticity, which is that you have a certain way of thinking, behavior patterns, habits, and the more you repeat them and the more emotional intensity is associated with them, the stronger those pathways become. Now, we can all get to a point in our life where some of those reflexes and patterns are no longer in our best interests, but they may have been there for a very long time. So, as I said earlier, just even realizing something is kind of half the battle. So the process that I've described in the To Be Magnetic work, well, which I've described in all my work, is raised awareness, focused attention, deliberate practice, and accountability. And I believe that raised awareness is half of the battle, and that is moving things from subconscious to conscious. Because if you don't know that that's your pattern, you can't do anything about it. As soon as you realize, every time I have a breakup, I do this. Every time I'm single and the wrong guy comes along, this is how I behave. Every time there's an opportunity for promotion, I don't put myself forward. You've got to be able to start to recognize these patterns. And then the second part is focused attention. And that's really what the journaling part does. It helps you to see what happens in different situations, see what's happened over the trajectory of time without necessarily making too much change. The actual DIs, which are the hypnosis audios, are the deliberate practice. And deliberate practice has to happen in real life as well. So it's, as Lacey says, it's the verbal, the action, and the energetics. And her work really deals with the energetics to allow you to then go into the outside world and say, no, it's not okay for someone to say that to me. Or, no, I won't settle for that apartment because I really think I can get a better one for the same price, or whatever it is. So then you start, that's really like a child who's crawling, starting to explore the world. That's all the way back that you go to do neuroplasticity. It's almost like being reborn as a different person. And the last piece is accountability, because if we were all left to ourselves to do this, there would inevitably be times where we were too tired, or it was too difficult, or something comes from left field and it sets us right back. And with that, I mean everything from, for me, it definitely used to be when I traveled a lot, that I would fall out of my exercise regime and it would be harder to start again. That's a very tangible example, but there could be much bigger things to do with relationships and emotions that get knocked off the path that you're on. And so having somebody or something through technology that keeps you accountable on the path that you're on just helps you. It's fine, it's normal to sometimes go off that path, but it helps you to get back on it quicker and make progress.
Something that was major for me when I was in Cabo for my wedding to help with my digestion when I was eating tons of different foods was Array's bloat. It was major. It works so quickly. It was so helpful. I'm so grateful that I had it because I could feel just so much better about everything I was consuming because my digestion was in flow.
And you feel super quick relief. I was actually surprised. So the ingredients that are in Array's supplements are sourced from the most potent part of every plant. So this ensures that their formulas work in under an hour, and it's true. I take it every night after dinner, and I just don't experience any like discomfort or bloat or anything like that.
Yes. So they have in the bloat one, they have bromeliad, which is in pineapple. They have ginger root, lemon balm, dandelion root, peppermint, slippery elm. So all these ingredients are naturally plant-based. So I never feel like I'm taking an actual supplement. I just feel like I'm taking beautiful plants that are helping support my body in the best digestion possible. I'll also take Calm Calm's incredible. It has magnesium in it, among other things, and that will be my nighttime beautiful ritual. But I really love that we're working with Array. I love that they're holistic. I love the packaging. I love the branding, and these products are incredible and they work.
Yes. So for our listeners only, you can use the code almost30 for 10% off your purchase. That is almost 30 for 10% off your purchase when you go to array.com, ARRAE.com. Use the code almost 30 for 10% off.
And if you want the link sent directly to your phone and you're part of our partnerships phone number line, you can text 380-600-3030. That's the Almost 30 Partnerships line. And you can text Array to get the link sent directly to your phone.
So I spent a weekend with some of my girlfriends the other week, and I brought Deux, D-E-U-X, baby. And it was so delicious.
Were you the coolest girl there?
I was the coolest girl there, and it didn't last, and I only got a few spoonfuls.
Dude.
But I am obsessed with dough. Again, you spell it D-E-U-X, and it's fucking delicious. So this is basically your healthy, clean ingredient cookie dough. You can eat it raw, or you can cook it and make cookies. It has great good for you ingredients like oats and almond butter, flaxseed, and coconut sugar. My favorites are the chocolate chip and the ginger doodle. I think you like the peanut butter, right?
I like the brownie batter
Oh!
and the peanut butter. And I love that it has immune support in it. It has collagen support, stress relief, or protein. So it's basically like your jam-packed, healthy version of cookies that are vegan. Eating the dough has been so much fun.
I know.
It's like freedom.
Yes,
You're like,
it's
I can
freedom.
eat this. Like,
It's freedom.
it's so good. You guys are going to love, if you love healthy cookies, you want to treat yourself, dough is your best choice.
Truly, it is it. It's vegan and plant-based, gluten-free, and soy-free as well. And for our listeners, you can go to eatdough.com. That's eatdeux.com and use the promo code almost30 for 20% off and free shipping on 3 jars. So if you get 3 jars, you'll get free shipping as well, but you'll get 20% off your order when you use the promo code almost30 at eatdough.com.
Ooh, enjoy. And you can also text dough to our phone number. You guys know that we have an Almost 30 phone number for our partners to make it really easy for you to get the discount codes and links sent directly to your phone. That number is 380-600-3030. That's 380-600-3030. And you can text DOUX, D-E-U-X, to that number and get the link sent directly to your phone. If you guys have been watching TV lately, you might have seen my commercial with Imperfect Foods, a brand that we know and love that I truly use. I was actually featured in one of their commercials talking about my love for sustainable, affordable groceries that I get delivered weekly to my door from Imperfect Foods.
I love it. I've actually been a fan since like their beginnings.
Yes.
I used to get Imperfect produce
Daniela
sent
Kende.
straight to my home. And I loved it so much because, you know, I didn't know that every single freaking year, billions of pounds of food go to waste. And that just like makes me sick to my stomach. And so what they do is they basically take the food that does not live up to grocery stores' cosmetic standards, though they're perfectly good to eat, and they use that and send it to their customers. And it's so much fun. I would get like a box of produce that I could just kind of make a little meal and save these fruits and veggies, but now they have everything you need.
Yeah, it's amazing. You don't have to wait at the grocery store for anything. You can get tons of options. They have amazing foods from their own brand. They have other brands, and you can personalize all of your orders. So it's free to sign up, and you only get charged when your groceries actually arrive.
Yes. So right now, Imperfect Foods is offering our listeners 20% off plus free shipping on your first order when you go to imperfectfoods.com, and make sure to use the promo code almost30. So try Imperfect Foods now, and for a limited time, get 20% off plus free shipping on your first order when you go to imperfectfoods.com and use the promo code almost30 to sign up.
And if you want that code and link sent directly to your phone, you can use the Almost 30 Partnerships line. That number is 380-600-3030. Add that to your phone book. It's 380-600-3030. It's a number that we'll be using to make it really easy for you guys to get the links for our partners sent directly to your phone so you're not searching for anything. And this code to get the Imperfect Foods link sent to your phone is IMPERFECT, and text it to the number 380-600-3030. Since the pandemic, we've really had to focus our team with being so remote on working together more effectively. And a huge thing that we've done at Almost 30 with our team, who lives all over the world, all 7 of us, is use Monday.com. We use Monday.com for sales and CRM for all of our partners that we work with through the podcast, and then also through project management. It's been huge. And I was so adverse to using a tool just because it felt like it would take so much time to set it up and use it. And I didn't really realize how much time, effort, and money it really saved our business by using Monday.com as a project management tool.
Yeah, it really gives our team the ability to create the tools they need for their workflow.
Yes.
And what's great as managers is that we don't have to like micromanage or feel like we need like check-ins all the time. Teams have the autonomy. So each part of Almost 30, they can own it and they can really own their flow. And then we can have visibility in it so that Krista and I can work on kind of bigger vision and creative for Almost 30. So it's just, I'm blown away at how helpful it has been. And if you don't believe us, there are over 100,000 teams that you could ask that use Monday.com. And whether you have a team of 5 people or 5,000 people, it's easy to integrate. And also they integrate tools you use every single day. So Gmail, etc. So don't worry about that.
Yeah, the integrations are easy. It helps everyone work together. It helps everyone stay on the same page. You can use it for HR, marketing, media, IT, sales, so many different things, any process, any department, any industry, anywhere, and it's the best.
Yep. Visit Monday.com for your free 2-week trial today. So sign up for your free 2-week trial at Monday.com today.
One of your favorite sponsors of ours is SafeSleeve, and they provide EMF radiation protection for your cell phone, your tablet, and your laptop, which is so important. Lindsay and I have all 3 of them. I have a case for my laptop, I have a case for my phone, and Justin has a cover for his tablet, and we love to protect ourselves as much as we can from the harmful effects of radiation.
Yeah, I've been loving, so I just put this new shield on my phone, and so it blocks the blue light, baby.
Oh,
yeah, so I'm feeling really good about that because I'm on my phone quite a bit. I'm sure a lot of you out there can relate. And we just got to protect ourselves. It's inevitable that we're going to be using technology and in front of screens quite a bit. So SafeSleeve is the company that we trust, and they are lab tested, and it blocks over 99% of RF and 92% of ELF radiation. And there's very few brands out there that offer lab tested protection. So just so you know, and you can read about it on their website, and we have a discount for you, 10% off at safesleevecases.com when you use the promo code almost30. Go to safesleevecases.com, use the promo code almost30 for 10% off.
And you can also use our partnerships number to text to get the link directly to your phone. You can text 380-600-3030. That's the Almost 30 partnerships line, 380-600-3030. And you can text SAFE to get the link sent directly to your phone.
The inner child piece, it just made me think. We interviewed someone the other day, and she has always been so connected to her inner child. It's like she has always been connected to her 6-year-old self. And I feel like we are kind of trained to, like you said, just kind of prune away parts of ourselves to be more mature, you know, when we're going into our teen years, going off to school, et cetera, et cetera. And then now in this manifestation work, we're like, okay, let's go back to our inner child and our younger self and, you know, kind of do the work there. So yeah, I'm just kind of curious just digging in a little bit deeper on that inner child work and why that is so important, and the connection to, our early life experiences, especially with our parental figures, and how that affects our self-worth, how that affects how we relate to people and how we relate to opportunities that are, you know, coming for us.
Yeah. So one of the things that Lacey thought was really interesting is that you only really need one positive adult role model in your life to have that chance to grow your healthy neural architecture. And it doesn't even have to be one of your parents. It can be a teacher. It can be a social, club leader or religious leader. But basically, there is usually one person that stands out as the person that gave you love, that was a role model for you for what you would be as an adult, or what life was like out there in terms of how they reacted to things. And like I said, the pathways that have been there the longest tend to be the strongest. It's like neurons that fire together, wire together. There's even a body of research called Ghosts in the Executive Suite, which means that by the time people are CEOs, they're still being driven by these childhood patterns if they haven't been resolved. And so inner child work is about going back and resolving that. And it's not like changing your memory. And this is one of the really like sticking points that we solved with the neuroscience, is it's changing the emotion that you hold around certain memories or certain relationship patterns. So for example, if somebody raises their voice and that always sort of makes you shake and sweat, that, that could be for a reason, for something that happened from your childhood, then you can't ever change the fact that there may have been domestic violence in your household when you were a child, but you can change how you feel emotionally and then how that shows up in your body when the same thing happens again later in your life. And, the way that Lacey suggests healing around that is that you go back to that moment and that you act as if you're the parent of your inner child and do, protect the child from what they experience. So I think that's similar to what your friend does.
I wonder what's happening there with the brain then, I guess, with like the neural transmitters. I guess if there's a neural pathway that is incredibly active, that is the trauma experience that is sort of running the show, is it then, I guess, what's happening?
So those sorts of trauma experiences relate to what we call the survival emotions, which are fear, anger, disgust, shame, and sadness. And the disgust can be self-disgust, and there's a lot of self-loathing in people who have experienced abuse of any kind in their childhood. And those emotions correlate with cortisol and adrenaline, both of which over different periods of time. So adrenaline is very short term, cortisol is sort of medium to long term, push you into the fright, flight, fight state. Or in the modern day, we see more freeze rather than, you're less likely to actually run away or actually physically assault someone, but you're much more likely to be in an important situation where somebody asks you something that you actually know and you just cannot recall it. So your brain kind of tends to let you down in those important situations. And so the way that the nervous system works is that apart from the brain and spinal cord, of course, there are nerves that go all around your body into all of your organs, your muscles, and particularly large supply to your gut and around your heart. And so the nerves that are around your heart, either through your heart rate, which obviously if it's higher, that's more likely to be to do with adrenaline. If it's lower, and adrenaline is the sympathetic nervous state, which is the fight, fright, flight state, and the slower heart rate, which is the parasympathetic state, is the rest and digest state. So that's how you feel like after you've had a lovely meal. It's how you feel when you're really ready for bed. It's how you feel when you're just having chilled out time with your loved ones. And so it can be two things. It can be that you're not very used to feeling like that because you didn't experience a lot of that in your childhood, or because it's repetition and emotional intensity, it can be that there were periods of feeling perfectly at ease in your childhood, but the emotions are focused on these particular pivotal points of really, seeing something negative, having a huge flood of cortisol that actually alters the way that your neurons communicate with each other and the way that your brain pathways go. So somebody who did experience childhood trauma is actually more likely to be affected by bad news, for example, that we were talking about earlier. And we know that people who repeatedly watched images of the Twin Towers falling on television, even people that had no connection to New York, didn't lose a loved one, that they could get PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And the chances are that their threshold for getting PTSD was lower, perhaps, than somebody who hadn't experienced much trauma in their life before.
Sorry. So if they have experienced trauma before, they're more likely to get PTSD again.
Not again necessarily. So if let's say you experienced some trauma in your childhood that wasn't bad enough to give you PTSD, but it perhaps made you a bit more fearful or a bit more likely to numb when you experience, high emotions, then the chances are that, because your brain pathways have been geared to be responsive to traumatic events, if you then reinforce that by watching traumatic events over and over again, there's a point at which we'd all become traumatized. But if somebody grew up with lots of oxytocin and not much cortisol, their threshold for that happening is going to be much higher.
Mm-hmm. Thinking about just what's happening right now and what's happened in the past couple of years, there's so many videos of really horrific, traumatic things that are played on loop. And I think that's a powerful point to that.
Mm-hmm. One of the pieces of what you discuss in Expanded is the fact that there are different emotions or feelings that travel through different neural pathways. So I'm going to butcher this a little bit, so I'd love for you to clarify, but I just thought it was fascinating because as humans, for example, envy and jealousy, I'm like, well, that seems kind of the same thing to me. Or, there are nuances of difference, but the fact that they are running in completely different neural pathways was fascinating to me. Again, it's that separation of and just kind of stepping out of, I am jealous, I am envious, it's all bad, and understanding that the two are very different and also physically, scientifically in your brain, very, very different. Can you speak more to that?
Yeah. So first of all, the basic human emotions, of which I only described the survival ones. So apart from those 5, there's also surprise, joy, excitement on one spectrum, and love, trust on one spectrum. Those basic emotions, we have not got identified pathways for how they run from the amygdala, which are the 2 almond-shaped structures deep in your limbic system, to the prefrontal cortex. But more complex things like jealousy and envy, which are a combination of different emotions and hormones and neurotransmitters, we have a bit more information about that from scanning. And actually, Lacey really helped me to clarify this, that envy is when there's something that somebody else has that you would like. And jealousy is when you think that something that you have is going to get taken away from you. So the study that I talked about with the jealousy that was so interesting was with primates, advanced primates like chimpanzees and bonobos who bond in pairs. If the partner of a male or female bonobo is spending too much time with a bonobo of the opposite gender, that's when you see jealousy, because you think my bonobo could actually go off with that single bonobo. So that's not envy. Envy is if another female bonobo has a really nice mango that you would like to eat. So what we saw with jealousy is that it showed up on the same pathway as social rejection, which we started talking about at the beginning. So that actually causes pain. Because physical pain and psychological pain show up very similarly in the brain. And that's the reason that people with emotional trauma get addicted to physical painkillers, because it does actually dull that pain. And the envy thing was more connected to reward. So that was the difference. Yeah, and it was, I did research that specifically for that episode, and it was really fascinating.
Wow.
How can that play into manifestation? I guess those feelings and emotions is there possibility to reprogram those, or would those be leveraged, or what would be the experience?
There's it's all about reprogramming. So that's what we believe, that all of these things can be reprogrammed. But you have to be very clear about the use of language, because otherwise you could be working really hard to program what you think it is. But if it's not actually that, then you haven't, you either haven't surfaced the correct memory or emotion, or it's like, trying to use the wrong tool to fix something. I was trying to think of an actual example, but I'm not very DIY, so I couldn't, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I'm thinking specifically about envy, and especially in like manifesting a relationship, where like when I was single for a long time, towards the end of it, and I kind of got hip to the idea because of Lacey, you know, looking for couples that kind of gave me that feeling of envy. And why? Because I wanted that, you know, and kind of reframing that to be like, wow, the fact that I can recognize that, for me, it felt like it could happen for me. And so I was just kind of calling in those expanders after expanders. And then I was able to identify more easily that healthy relationship when I came upon it. So, you know, if I was thinking about envy before this, I'd be like, oh, that's a bad emotion. Like I should check myself. But it was actually something that was really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, what Lacey says is that envy shows you what you actually really want. And, you know, a very practical way to think about it is turn envy into inspiration, which is what you do through expanders. Interestingly, I was contacted by someone recently who said, you know, I'm in my early 40s. Because of COVID, I've lost my job. I'm back living with my parents. I'd really like to meet someone and have a family. And I've got to that point where I just can't be happy for my friends anymore when good things seem to happen for them all the time. So I said a few things about her situation, and I gave examples of women, including myself, who had achieved that, you know, at her age or after. But then I said, you must not, for your own sake, go down that path of not being able to be happy for other people, because that it doesn't matter what happens around you once you've gone down that path. You could meet someone, and I've seen this happen to people, but you're just never happy because you've given into that, you know, envy and jealousy, and it just turns itself to something else. So, you know, then it could be, okay, I've got a partner, but I can't get pregnant. And then it could be, I've had one baby, but everyone else has two. And I, you know, I've seen that too much. It's really awful. And I said to this person, spend time with people like that and just pour love all over them. That's the only way that it will work. And I can see from your smile and your story that that's what you did.
Yeah. Well, I'm just like, it's a true downward spiral that is so hard to get out of, you know, once you've given into that feeling. And that's the lens through which you look at your life. It's like, it's really, really hard. So I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. And once you're not in that phase of being someone that's not happy for other people, when you see people that are not happy for other people, it's really hard. You're like, oh, that's a really unattractive quality to have. It's, you know, I understand it, but I just am like, I know people that are like that, and I'm like, wow, that is not the vibe, because you're not wishing well for people. I'm like, oh, that's scary. So what's happening there? Is it like an inner child thing where as a child you felt like you'd be left behind, or what's the experience there that's happening within ourselves that would cause someone like this woman to not eventually end up not being happy for other people?
I mean, it's definitely a scarcity mindset. So it's definitely the idea that if somebody else gets something, that means there's less chance for me to have it, which simply isn't the case for anything, whether it's like freelance work or a boyfriend or, you know, travel. So I think it comes back to what we were discussing at the beginning about loss avoidance. So cultivating that idea of abundance, that there's enough resources out there for everyone, allows you to feel perfectly happy for everybody else and keep trying to get what you want in your life. Whereas if you genuinely believe, and this could be because perhaps your parents didn't have much money, or a huge topic we got into on Expanded that we never expected to was sibling rivalry. And it's a really big thing, actually, it's never talked about, and it affects a lot of people. Not necessarily directly with their sibling once you're adults, but it plays out in these other things. So my best guess at why this person can't be happy for others is because they were at the non-receiving end, you know, the person that lost out within sibling rivalry. And often it's that the other sibling was much cuter and people, you know, were always complimenting that child and not you, or giving them gifts and not you. So that unfortunately, hopefully doesn't happen much anymore. But I think, you know, it definitely did sort of in the 70s and 80s, for example. So then you think, okay, because then you think it's always a comparison thing. So my brother or sister is cuter than me and more people liked them, so that was bad for me. Then you grow up, and I'm saying this as I'm thinking, that then when you grow up, you think, well, if that girl's prettier or if that person gets the job, then that means I go without, I get less, I'm less loved. Whereas if you didn't have that element of sibling rivalry, or you were the sibling that had, you know, the benefits of sibling rivalry, then it's easier to think, well, you know, I love my sibling. Yeah, I got this nice present, or somebody said something nice to me, but you kind of don't notice that it's not happening to the sibling. But having said that, neuroplasticity means that it doesn't matter which sibling you were, you can change how you choose to view the world. I think, you know, if my friendship group from school, high school, we've all had points at which we could have gone down that road of not being happy for other people, or we chose to be super happy for other people, even if they were getting the things that we thought we wanted. So that is a decision that you make, and that, you know, for your own sake, mustn't be blamed on something from the past, because it's actually very plastic and flexible.
Yeah, I've been trying to figure out, and I think I know what it is, but just kind of where my comparison tick comes from. It's like, I do think from a very young age, I don't think it came from my sibling dynamics, because I actually think I was kind of the one that they were comparing themselves to, because I was the oldest. But really, like, I was put in dance classes and different things like that, where there were these slight comparisons happening where I was like, why doesn't my toe point like hers? And like, oh, she got the solo and I didn't. And, you know, this happens to a lot of people where they're in activities or even in school. It's like institutionalized, that there is kind of this comparison happening, this hierarchy, this like strive to be like fill in the blank. And I think because that was like my everyday, I was always in classes and activities, like it definitely became just a part of what I did, was compare myself. And yeah, I've definitely become aware of that and feel much more in control now. But it's so funny how we're literally taught that in so many ways.
But I mean, that's not personal to you. That's because the schooling system praises for talent rather than effort.
Yes.
And that's the original research from Stanford by Professor Carol Dweck on fixed mindset and learning mindset. So if it was you're only good if you get 10 out of 10 or you come top of the class, then you never actually want to try anything because you want to maintain your top score. Whereas if you're told, oh, well, you did so well because you tried really hard at that, then you want to try harder at other things. And then you're a person that's going to go out there and take risks. So I think that's institutionalized.
Yes, completely agree.
Wow. Yeah, how you mentioned earlier, and we're sort of talking about it, but how can we keep our brains flexible? How can we ensure that we have the opportunity to rewire and reprogram and restructure our brains?
So the foundations of that is sort of, you know, things that we have to do are sleep, get good quality length and good quality and length of sleep. Eat healthily and, you know, regularly keep your brain topped up with fuel. Keep your brain hydrated. Keep your brain oxygen.
How exactly? What does good quality food for the brain mean, and what does good water? Like, I guess, how can we keep it hydrated?
Okay, so 75% of the brain is made up of water, and of the solid matter, 60% is made up of fat. So the focus should be on good fats and hydrating foods in your diet. So that's like oily fish if you eat fish, eggs if you eat eggs, and then avocado, nuts, seeds, olive oils, obviously leafy greens, but particularly hydrating foods like cucumber, melon. And then the best foods for your brain are dark-skinned foods. So like beets, black beans, eggplant. And the good news is that dark chocolate over 80% and organic coffee count in that too, because in the skins of dark foods, there's a something called anthocyanins, which are really strong antioxidants that support your brain, protect it from inflammation, but also support growth of new cells. So I just try to eat as many of those things as I can. Also, because of the gut-brain connection, fermented foods, so like kefir, kombucha, sauerkraut, kimchi. And then, just eating around that, the sort of right proportion of protein, fat, and carbs. So just not too much carbs, but some whole grains you need to make serotonin, for example. The hydration equation is 0.5 liter of water for every 30 pounds of your body weight. So you need to work out what that ideal number is and then see where you're at the moment. And if there's a big gap, just increase it by 1 glass of water per day over a sort of, 1 to 2 week period. Otherwise, you're going to notice you're going to the bathroom a lot more. I know that you're saying I'm going for you, Krista.
Tell me more. What's next?
Sparkling water?
Yeah, what's free next?
Sparkling water is not as hydrating as regular water.
Dang it.
Oh,
I sort of knew that, but why?
Yeah, why?
It's the carbonation process. It's two things, because what you're actually drinking is water and bubbles, and the bubble isn't hydrating. But also the carbonation process reduces the pH of the drink, so it makes it more acidic.
I love sparkling water, so
yeah, dude, she's the sparkling water girl.
I'm the sparkling water queen. But I'm actually, so lately we've been drinking Element, which is like electrolytes, salts, no sugar. But I've just noticed such a difference, because I'm not gonna give up my sparkling water, but I'm gonna supplement with a little bit more health or smart hydration.
I knew there was something up with sparkling water.
But I'm curious too, like, do you recommend, because this is what is hot now. We're in like the space where we get a lot of products sent, et cetera. And it's like nootropics and supplements for our brain. And so is there anything that you've heard of that you're like, yes, this is great. If you can take it, do. But I also worry sometimes that people are just hopping on a trend and a train and creating products around it. I say that with love.
Yeah. So I think we're on the same vibe. But so I am actually the chief science officer of a brain care supplement, but all that's in it is it's vegan. So all that's in it is algae oil with the DHA and the EPA omega-3s that you need, the vitamin B complex, vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, iron, and a few other smaller things. So to me, that, having the healthy balanced diet and then taking a supplement like that actually has the things that your brain needs enough of that you may not be able to get from your diet because of agriculture and non-organic farming and things like that, is what you need to do. All the other things that are classed under the, speech marks of nootropics, the phrase that I have for that is that they are like Viagra. They can improve your one-off performance, but they won't save your marriage. So
got it.
Yeah, it's almost funny to think about how, I guess, it would travel, down our esophagus into our stomach, and then it's digested by the stomach, and then I'm just wondering how it would even get to the brain.
I mean, most substances do not cross the blood-brain barrier. So that's the first question I would ask. But then, the medications that are used for ADD and dementia, they are abused under that banner of nootropics, but the long-term result is not good. And if you think about that movie Limitless, the guy, accessed all of his brain power. Well, we can do that through hard work. You said, what's the best way to promote neuroplasticity? The best way is to learn a new language or learn a musical instrument. But that's hard work. Most people won't commit to doing that. And other things are exercise and meditation and what Lacey does. But in the movie, what people never remember, which I always try to remind people, is that in the end, he stopped taking the pill because he knew how to access all of his brain power. So he did it naturally. And that's what I'm all about.
Yeah. Do you believe, what's that phrase that we only access 80% of our brain, or like 60% of our brain? Have you heard that?
I've heard there's been a long time myth we only access 10% of our brain, and there's actually been a movie made about that too. No, we access different parts of our brain for different things. So, right now we'll be accessing our speech centers, I'll be accessing my memory. We might all be accessing our imagination. So I won't be doing some of the other things that I'm capable of doing. But if I wanted to cook a meal whilst I was speaking with you both, I could do that. But that would recruit different parts of my brain.
So fascinating.
So good.
I'm so happy
Same. Last question for me.
Convo.
What about the pineal gland? What do you know about the pineal gland?
I call it the pineal gland.
I call it the pineal gland. I'm the doctor. Hey, I'm the doctor here. Pineal.
So, doctor, but that might be my accent. It might be my accent.
Pineal.
Tell me about the pineal gland.
It sounded like something else to me, but we won't go there.
Tell me about penises.
So that gland is the one that releases melatonin at evening time. So we're supposed to live in keeping with the light-dark cycle. So usually about an hour before it goes dark, we release melatonin. It takes an hour to fall asleep. Because we use blue light devices, that's often disrupted. But I think what you're asking about is that sometimes on brain scans, if that's become calcified, it shows up as a white dot here, because it's deep inside the brain, but it's sort of, basically it's behind the third eye. So a lot of people believe it's the third eye. There's no scientific evidence for that, but I think it's a nice thought. It's actually not good if your pineal gland is calcified, so it's perhaps better not to see it. But yeah, there is a lot of spiritual talk about that, but I think it's just because if you ever see a scan and you see a white dot deep in there, then that correlates to what we think about it as the third eye.
And what, I know the answer partially, but what calcifies the pineal gland?
Well, so a lot of the, I don't want to say conspiracy theories in that I'm judging them as wrong, but what people say can cause that is things like fluoride in toothpaste, fluoride in drinking water, other toxins, heavy metals that we can pick up, like mercury through eating like deep seawater fish and things like that. So it's basically a degenerative process. It shouldn't happen.
Got it.
And yeah, there are lots of theories about how and why it happens. So it does seem a bit counter to me that would then be seen as a spiritual thing to actually see your third eye. And I think, considering that the third eye is about seeing inward, I would rather focus on a sense that's little known about but I think is so important to people, which is interoception, which is the sense of the physiological state of your body. And like I mentioned, children, at first they can't control their bowels and their bladder, but then eventually they can. That's because we all know what it feels like that I need to go to the loo or I'm hungry. And we learn that. But other things we don't learn as well are to listen to our body when we're fatigued, listen to our body when we're making ourselves sick through overwork or, numbing. And the problem with that is that you get used to being tired all the time. You get used to being sick all the time. And you just don't listen to your body. So I think actually I did mention sensory integration and, all of our senses at the beginning, but I think this inward sense, whether it's the third eye or not, is important. And that's the reason that we do body scans, for example.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
Love it. This has been so much fun. I'm so grateful. I can predict our next interview now.
I was going to say, it wasn't long enough. That time went so quickly.
I know, so quick. Well, I was already like, we're going to have another one. But this has been so much fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Where can our community connect with you if they're looking for more?
Oh, thank you so much. So I'm most interactive on Instagram at Dr. Tara Swart, and we're all friends on Instagram. I am friends with you on Twitter as well, but I don't really use it as much. I don't think you do either, no. And then my book, The Source, The Secrets of the Universe, Science of the Brain, is available on Amazon and in all major bookstores in the US and the world, actually.
Oh, I can't wait to get it.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And you can listen to Dr. Tara on expanded. Those are the most popular episodes. I would
Yeah.
think. That's what Lacey says, and it's
Yeah.
just so good and fascinating. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank
appreciate
you
Oh,
so
thank
much.
you.
Hopefully we can
Thank
meet
you.
soon in person.
Yes.
Yeah,
When
that
you
would be
come over on
wonderful.
this side, that would be so nice. But we appreciate you
I
so
can't
much, and we'll
wait.
see you soon.
We'll see you soon.
Lots of love. Bye.
Bye. See ya.